talking to a human I can depend on to bring me happy. Thank you, happy.
I'm Brian Kreutz. Standing by my side is Lily Fox-Lim.
Yes, and we'd like to welcome you to A Captain's Log. We're trekking through a sensational world of interviews and the latest in news from enormously trailblazing people behind the writing in Star Trek. This week we have the 6-time Scribe Award-winning author Greg Cox as our interview guest.
Yes, the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers Award every year.
Wow.
And Greg, well, he's brought home a winner so many times. We have the honor of meeting and talking with Greg Cox. Now, I've read many of his novels and book series, in particular, the Q Continuum trilogy and the Eugenics Wars, The Rise and Fall of Khan, Noonien Singh.
Ooh, BK, you're always reading the best Star Trek novels and even books that you always throw my way. Literally on set here.
Right?
No surprises. Okay, Michael Jan Friedman was the last great author we had, and you could relate to so many stories that he wrote. You know, I'm a little jealous.
Okay, I'm grateful to have asked Michael Jan Friedman many burning and yearning for Trek fandom questions, but you, Lily, have read the ultimate of ultimate Star Trek written gems that also became a language in Mark Okrand's books.
The best.
And then, of course, yes, you and I had the honor of interviewing Mark Okrand here on A Captain's Log in 2021. Well, Greg Cox has written 18 Star Trek related books. I think it's even more now, is what he's telling me. Plus, he's also written Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Iron Man, Terminator Salvation. That's the awesome gray slip-sleeve DVD cover of the director's cut, The Wrath of Khan. I own that one. And within it, I love how Greg's input and contributions to the eugenic wars of the 1990s with Khan are brought to the forefront for us Star Trek fans.
Ooh, speaking of fans of Greg's, I heard you mention one particular writer on our writing team here on A Captain's Log who asked us to do a very detailed fanboy question for Greg in our upcoming interview.
Yes, absolutely. That's Chip, our writer. So it's not every day or even ever that us Star Trek fans get to live the dream and actually meet or have a friend meet Star Trek's finest on a show like this. So yes, Chip, we will ask Greg your question coming up, and there's much more in store in Star Trek lore.
Ambassador, wait just a moment, please. Before you get to World of News, I have a Star Trek headline news story that can be described in 3 words. Now, these 3 words will be used to describe the sound tires make when you stop unexpectedly and know where you were when you heard about it.
Talking about drumming, up drama and raising our expectations, Raj. Come on now, out with it, Android. What's those 3 little words that you want to tell us, little Tin Man?
Well, with the absence of both parental figures, my mom, Andrea, and dad, Roger Corby, I find jokes for humor are fascinating, offering comfort, even though I don't laugh, and on the opposite end of the synaptic infusion derived from that android duplicator when I was human, Star Trek describes and assists my human connection as an outsider to feel accepted into a supportive reality of exploration and contribution.
Raj, thank you for sharing your emotional side. You're a stronger and bigger person for stepping up and sharing what's left of your humanity through that synaptic infusion process in your android consciousness. What is it you would like to share on your 3 big newsworthy words?
Okay, Lily. Of course we're on a Star Trek talk show, so this news is about a Star Trek show. The 3 words are Kelvin Timeline Show.
Roger that, Raj. Yes. Nice.
Raj, one of those celebrations is for you since you're on screen and you're not here. Wow, what a stellar segue into our news story. Now, there have been interview bits and confirmations from Kate Mulgrew as Janeway that she would come back. Could this be a Voyager Kelvin Timeline series? Alternatively, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine series has been talked about as a revival of sorts. Could that potentially be a Kelvin alternative timeline series with so many possibilities? Who's to say it could be a mixture of single Kelvin series with both of Star Trek's Voyager and Deep Space Nine characters? Heck, Lily, Harry Kim might actually get an overdue promotion from an ensign. You know, maybe he'll be Lieutenant Junior grade at some point. Or we could get to see how Kira could potentially be the captain of Deep Space Nine before the Federation ever arrived. Now, as you know, the Kelvin Timeline was created in the theatrical film directed by J.J. Abrams titled, well, simply, Star Trek.
That was the title, really?
Yes.
No, yes. This Kelvin Timeline was made so that we could continue the younger legacy of original series characters, but not infringe on classic Star Trek settings, thanks to Eric Bana's Romulan Nero character in the past that resulted in the creation of an alternate reality. In this reality, Nero was responsible for the destruction of the USS Kelvin and also destruction of the alternate reality's planet Vulcan, as Leonard Nimoy's Spock character witnessed from far up in space. And this has set up the possibility to relive and, in a way, reinvent Star Trek series and characters with recasting of younger actors. I am so excited about this. All of them sound cool.
Oh my gosh, I am too.
The Kelvin writers at Paramount Plus would have centuries upon centuries of unwritten history to explore. I could easily see Tree Lane from original Star Trek finally get credit as an actual Q. With a recast since William Campbell has passed away, Tree Lane is revealed to be a Q, was written by Peter David in his book Q Squared. On that note of non-corporeal beings, our guest, Greg Cox, wrote in his book series, the Q Continuum trilogy. Q also had dealings with original series non-corporeal being Gorgon, known as the Friendly Angel.
Oh yes, Raj, the possibilities are endless for the Kelvin Timeline now. Now, Lily and I will return with our interview guest, Greg Cox, to discuss this after we see Raj off for his other duties.
Our interview with Greg is up in a moment here on A Captain's Log.
A Captain's Log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to A Captain's Log, the Star Trek talk show that interviews the best writers like Greg Cox. But they leave out letting androids like me ask the burning questions. Now, Greg is a New York Times best-selling author, including the best-selling Star Trek Next Generation Q Continuum trilogy, first released in 1998. There's Q Space, Q Zone, and Q Strike. Raj out.
Oh, that android made up so much groundbreaking talk and an amazing newsworthy item.
Yes, and he has more holodeck hallucination hypnosis therapy to endure.
Ooh.
I've scheduled him with one of the Starfleet teachers on board our ship.
You did? Oh no, Lily, is that real therapy for Raj or one of your pranks?
Let's welcome Greg Cox
Greg's
to our
here.
show.
Greg, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Greg, tell us how you got your start as a full-time editor for sci-fi publisher Tor Books based in New York, and how this had an impact on your writing for Star Trek later on.
The short version is I started out writing short fiction, selling to magazines like Amazing Stories Magazine and like Shayne Mystery Magazine. In hindsight, I was always meant to be a writer, but I didn't know any writers growing up. It was not like a thing. And it was like intellectually, I knew the books didn't grow on trees. But it's not until you go to conventions, you start seeing people like Vonda McIntyre and such, this is like a real job and people actually do this. This is an option. Basically, I eventually met David Hartwell, who was a legendary science fiction editor. And he was the guy who actually launched the Star Trek program at Pocket Books back in the 80s, being a starving writer waiting tables in Seattle. And David convinced me to move to New York City and get involved in New York publishing. David actually recruited me to come out and got me my first job in publishing. And, and I'm giving you the short version. Eventually, I ended up working at Tor Books, which is one of the leading publishers of science fiction and fantasy in America. And I worked there for many years as a full-time editor. And here's where Star Trek comes in. Besides the fact that just being part of the community, I started to know all the other editors and all the, when I first started at Tor, one of the other young assistant editors, one cubicle over from me, was a guy named John Ordover. He was also a young assistant editor at Tor. John eventually moved on and became the editor of the Star Trek book line at Pocket Books.
Nice.
So you see the connection
yes,
here.
Yes, I do.
And basically what happened was Deep Space Nine happened.
Okay.
Deep Space Nine came up. Suddenly Pocket Books was launching a whole new line of books. And they needed to expand their stable. They needed a bunch of new writers, because now they're doing TOS books, and now they're doing TNG books, and now they're doing DS9 books. So I got a call from John, my former colleague at Tor, who I was still in touch with. In fact, I had lunch with every Wednesday. And hey, Greg, how would you and John Betancourt like to write? I need a bunch of DS9 books, and I need them fast. There's this new show coming DS9. I'm going to send you the Bible. John even had the idea for the plot. It was like Baby Hordes eat Deep Space Nine. And that was, good God, like 30 years ago.
Nice. I see the connection.
Like nearly half my life ago. But I started out as a struggling writer. I moved over to the editorial desk.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll bet you're seeing open doors and opportunities now like never before.
Greg, you've been called a superhero-themed writer, and you're well known in the industry for these types of stories within popular franchises. Can you speak to this superhero or superpower writing style with a Star Trek flavor, consisting of characters like Khan Noonien Singh, Q, and Gorgon the Friendly Angel, for example, like in your Q Continuum series?
I'm a TOS guy. I mean, I've watched religiously and enjoyed all of the latter-day series. I've even written for many of them. But, I like TOS. One thing that I like about TOS is I gravitate towards sometimes the more fantastical elements of the show. On TOS, you could have Abraham Lincoln showing up, or the Greek god Apollo with his green hand showing up. I just found out they're making a Hallmark ornament, which is Apollo's green hand clutching the Enterprise. I am sorely tempted.
Oh, I have to pick up that ornament. Yes.
And, all the really sort of fantastic, and the weird godlike beings, and Jack the Ripper, and what I call the spinning pinwheel of hate from Day of the Dove. These are all kind of almost sort of more comic booky than hard SF. I'll be honest, I have never pretended to be a hard SF guy. There are writers who do good Star Trek hard SF. Hyper Bennett. I have sort of a bit of a comic book pulp sensibility. Mm-hmm. And indeed, going back to what you were talking, one of the reasons why John called me to write the Deep Space Nine book was, and the reason why we wrote it together with another author named John Gregory Betancourt, too many Johns in the story, is that John Betancourt and I had already been collaborating on writing Batman tie-ins for DC.
Oh, nice.
And I would say Ordover had read our collaborative Batman stories and liked them and said, hey, you and Betancourt did a good job teaming up on those Batman stories. Why didn't you team up on the DS9 book?
Sure. Yeah.
That's why that book was a collaboration, because we at that time, John Betancourt and I had just collaborated on a bunch of Batman stories.
I see. Okay.
And just to date you how long ago this is, these were stories that were published to tie in with Batman Returns, the second Tim Burton movie. I like to joke, I have been writing Batman since Michelle Pfeiffer was Catwoman.
That's right.
So,
That's 1992, Greg. 1992. Yes. Wow.
I'll tell you a quick funny story if you don't mind me digressing. I recently wrote the novelization for The Dark Knight Rises, which was very exciting. But when I was out there at Warner Brothers, I was out there at the Warner Brothers set. It was very cool, working on the novelization of the Dark Knight Rises. I happened to mention to some nice young woman who was working on the movie that, I've been writing Batman since Michelle Pfeiffer was Catwoman. And she looked at me and goes, wow, that was the year I was born.
No.
I'm going, yeah. Ouch.
Ouch, right. What type of reaction is she expecting
but
there?
It's true, So.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, like you said, I started out doing Batman, and Batman actually led me to writing Star Trek. So you were absolutely right there about the superhero connection.
I like it.
And I have gravitated to superhuman beings and Q and Gorgon the Friendly Angel and the glowing pinwheel of death. of hate.
I love that. Greg, tell us about your first two Star Trek books, Deep Space Nine's Devil in the Sky, which included rock tunneling Hortas from the classic Star Trek original series, and Star Trek The Next Generation's book, Dragon's Honor. Tell us how it all came about, and did you have to write more than just an outline first, or were you asked to co-write a story in these well-established series?
Well, those are two very different situations. Dragon's Honor, they needed a lot of Star Trek books right away, and a lot of Deep Space Nine books right away. We started writing the outline before the show debuted. We were given the series Bible, and that was about it. It was actually our editor, John Ordover, who had the basic concept of, okay, Baby Horta's amok Deep Space Nine. And then Betancourt and I got together, we did a plot. And we were actually very cunning about that, because collaboration is tricky, and, basically we divvied up the plot. And in terms of that book, everything on the station I wrote, and everything on the away team, there's a whole subplot about the away team off on a mission to rescue the mother Horta, who's been kidnapped by the Cardassians. That's mostly Betancourt.
Okay.
So, and we did this deliberately so that we could work independently of each other. I'm doing my, he's doing the A plot, I'm doing the B plot. And then we got together one snowy weekend to write the climax at the end when the two plots converge.
Okay.
And that's actually how we coordinated that book. Dragon's Honor, which I wrote with Kij Johnson, who, by the way, is now an award-winning fantasy author. That actually was not meant to be a collaboration. That started out as a Kij book. Kij wrote the original outline. She was supposed to write that entire book. Then, as it happens, real life intruded. There was some stuff going on in her real life. She had to move cross-country, start a new job, and it got to be a problem. So, largely as a favor for a friend, did I mention that Kij was the managing editor at Tor Books?
Wow, that's a big connection.
This is the Tor Mafia here, okay?
So you had the outline in the first draft to go off of as a premise?
Largely as a favor to an old friend. Kij and I go way back. Finished the book for her and we split money.
Kij Johnson, wow, she only had this one and only Star Trek book. That's impressive that she won Saturn Awards and other awards. Wow. Greg Cox is with us here on A Captain's Log. Greg, how do you approach a franchise like Star Trek by creating continuity to well-known characters but not getting off on the canon? It's a fine-tuned skill that you have if you can share your approach and how long it takes to go through the whole process on a Star Trek novel.
Well, honestly, these projects are almost never initiated by me. It usually begins with a phone call from someone saying, hey, Greg, we need a Star Trek book for next July. What you got? We need a TOS novel, we need a Voyager novel. I then put together, usually write about a 12-page outline. This is the basic plot. I send it into the editor, they have comments. It's a very collaborative process. And then they send it on to CBS. There's a little bit of back and forth. They, do this, don't do this. And it goes back and forth a few times. And then we eventually settle on a plot we all agree on. I get the go ahead. I start writing the book. And then when I'm done, after I've done writing the whole manuscript, I turn in the manuscript again and we go through it again. They, review the manuscript. Oh, this is good. And at this point, like I said, it's pretty well, the Star Trek line of pocket books has been going since like 1982 or 1979 or something. So it's a,
wow.
and generally they're very good. If you got it approved in the outline, this part, don't do that, Yeah. And sometimes it's very, I joke, I talk to my, girlfriend. It's like, well, the good news is I got the comments back and they're incredibly minor and trivial, and the good, and they're, Janeway cannot drink coffee in the transporter room.
Okay, fair.
And that's actually a note I got once.
Very specific.
Honestly, if that's just, okay, I can fix that in 10 minutes.
Greg, please tell us your favorite Star Trek book that you've written and a short story of feedback that you've received.
Sometimes if you do good nuts, they tell you. I mean, when I was writing the Q books, I flirted with the idea of revealing how Q met Guinan. I got a very nice note back from Paramount saying, no, we would prefer to keep that mysterious for the time being. I was working on a time travel plot, and I was actually talking to Margaret Clark, who was my editor on that book. And she said, well, why don't you use 7 of 9? I said, I can do that? Because honestly, I would never have had the nerve to suggest a Captain Kirk, 7 of 9 crossover. I said, I can do that? He said, yeah, we'll write the outline. We'll see if we'll run it by the flagpole. And Paramount approved it, and the book was published. And I wrote the, I think, one and only Captain Kirk 709 team-up novel.
Now, you have new Star Trek material coming out. Can you give us a sneak peek, Greg?
Yeah, this issue came out this week.
Nice.
And it has my malfunctioning Dixon Hill holodeck program story in it.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you about Moriarty, considering we're talking about malfunctioning holodecks. Thank you for sharing this.
Okay, I got to show off. Give me a second here.
Okay.
Like I said, the story literally came out this week.
Okay, great.
Yeah, look at the cool art. It's actually Durango and Dixon Hill team up on an adventure.
Oh, no way.
Durango being Deanna's character from A Fistful of Datas.
Yeah, Next Generation holodeck, yes.
So it's a Dixon Hill Durango crossover.
I love it. Yes, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
Have you ever met the actors who played Q, like John Delancey and Melvin Belli, who played Gorgon? And if you haven't, what would you want them to know about your writing and continuing the legacy of their characters in novel form?
I have had, glancing encounters with them at various conventions, most notably the Shore Leave convention. I met John Delancey very briefly once, and I thanked him for making me a New York Times bestseller. Since
cool.
It was my Q books that actually did that. And honestly, I think he was a little confused. I had to say.
That's awesome.
More recently, I had a very nice conversation with Anson Mount.
Oh, really?
Captain Pike.
Yes.
A few years back. We sat around and talked books.
Mm-hmm.
He's very into books. He recommended science fiction author Greg Egan to me, and I preached the gospel of Richard Matheson to him. And we had a lovely chat about books in the bar at Shore Leave.
You shut down the bar together? That's impressive.
That's cool.
Hey, and I will brag. Can I brag?
Yeah, of course.
Of course, yes.
A friend of mine actually knows Diana Muldaur.
Really?
And I heard this only secondhand that he actually gave Diana Muldaur a copy of my Pulaski story. And apparently I got the thumbs up seal of approval from Dr. Pulaski herself.
We have a writer here on our show that we were talking about Dr. Pulaski actually yesterday and how he wishes there was more about her story.
Yeah.
And you got to continue her story. That's impressive. And also impressive that you got confirmation from her and her blessing. It was Diana Muldaur. Yeah.
The editor, John Freeman, called and said, "Hi, Greg. We'd like a story about Dr. Pulaski."
Since we're talking about Khan and Madeline Rue, who would have been great to see her in The Wrath of Khan, how do you go about incorporating all the threads into one story without destroying continuity? And where did you get the inspiration to put real-world events into your two Khan books? I'm sure it was a lot of research.
The Eugenics Wars were a challenge because, as we all know, 1996 has come and gone, and And my editor, that was John Ordover. And I realized early on there were two ways to do this. We could either just throw real actual history out the window and make up this incredible kick-ass apocalyptic super war fought in 1996 that never happened.
Yeah.
We could try to actually somehow work the Eugenics Wars into the actual history of the 1990s. Mm-hmm. For various reasons, we decided that it would be more fun to try to actually. So I think of that book as those books as a giant crossword puzzle. I had like two timelines. I had the history of the 1990s as laid down by Star Trek, mm-hmm. and the history of the 20th century is laid down by Star Trek. And I had the actual history of, and how can I sort of make the two together,
Right.
And I tried to bring in all the other stuff from all the other things we've seen of the 20th century in Star Trek. So I brought in Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln, who of course would be contemporary, and Sean Christopher. We remember Sean Christopher, who was going to lead the first Saturn mission, son of mm-hmm. Colonel Captain John Christopher. I brought in Janeway's descendant from the Millennium Project.
Yeah.
I tried to find. And those three people who were in suspended animation they found in the neutral zone on TNG.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I kept trying to. I made up a list of everything we knew about what happened in the latter part of the 20th century, according to Star Trek, and what really happened, and then we had fun. And I'll tell you something I had to change.
Okay.
This is true, but in my original outline, Khan blew up the World Trade Center.
Are you kidding me?
And this was before 9/11. You predicted the World Trade Center destruction?
That's crazy. Yeah, that's very interesting. You're threading together the real world events with Star Trek fiction.
Yes, I was writing that book when 9/11 happened. About 20 blocks from where I was writing the book. I was living in New York at the time. And yeah, I remember John and I getting phone. It was a horrible, horrible time. And I won't bring this whole conversation down. But I remember at some point I talked to John. He said, you realize we can't do the World Trade Center thing. No, of course not.
Please share the story about your book in a sense that predicts real-world events in the Star Trek universe.
There was an earlier World Trade Center bombing.
Okay. Yeah, that's
2
right.
years earlier.
93 or 94 or something, yeah.
I had Khan responsible for that because that would have been happening right during the middle of the eugenics wars.
Okay. That's
I
cool.
blame Khan for the first World Trade Center bombing, but that was still a little close to home for a fun Star Trek novel coming out, a year after, coming out, around the same time. So yeah, we could change that. But yeah, like I said, the challenges of mixing real history kind of collided with Star Trek there in sort of a weird way. Is a book called Contest of Champions. It came out in November 2022. It is about a disputed presidential election. It landed literally in November 2022.
You've got to be kidding me, Greg. Wow.
It was way more prophetic than I intended it to be, okay? That was honestly very freaky.
Yeah.
And it was actually very kind of funny because when I was doing publicity for this book, people were like, obviously you were inspired by all this stuff. I was like, how fast do you think I can write?
Right.
I submitted that outline 3 years ago. I turned to the it was literally November 2022, a book about a fractious, disputed presidential election on an alien planet.
That is insane, Greg. Wow.
And it landed November 2022. That was
during the election. Yeah.
And I was, oh, Jesus Christ, freaking out a little bit.
A Captain's Log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to A Captain's Log. Bryan and I are joined this week by New York Times bestselling author Greg Cox. Greg, have you ever pitched a script to producers or been asked to write a TV episode script or a screenplay for a film in Star Trek or elsewhere?
A couple times. I have never sealed the deal.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that back when Voyager was on the air, the Voyager people very nicely invited me to pitch to them. And I actually had a couple of pitch meetings with them. There was some interest in one or two of the ideas I pitched, but it never came to pass. I think part of that, honestly, it's a different world. I know publishing. I don't know Hollywood, and the whole business of, I told you how books are written, and then I write a 12-page outline and it's sent to an editor, and that's my comfort zone. The whole business of going into a room and just doing a verbal pitch, and that's a skill. And
yes.
That's a skill set that I don't claim to have mastered.
Greg, please tell us about your upcoming projects, and if you can maybe share a website or a Facebook page. Also, do you have a Star Trek project or projects in the works right now?
One is for a weird Western anthology, a collection of Western horror stories. I think it's called The Good, the Bad, and the Uncanny.
Okay.
And I wrote a very scary Western Bigfoot story. And that's coming out sometime in the spring. I don't know the exact date. And then a really weird project. There's a book coming out, I think it's called Double Trouble. And it's being published by the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers.
Greg Cox, thank you for sharing your stories and trekking along with us for the last half hour. Lily and I appreciate your time and for you delving into your career with stories.
So happy, my old friend. I'm glad you've manifested yourself into a